So Mr. Deeds Goes to Town was the first picture that I ever deliberately tried to say something. And what I was trying to say was that the value of the individual, the divinity and the worth of the individual is against the conforming herd, and how the individual had it within him to dig deep down in his innermost recesses and come up with the necessary wit and humor and courage to cope with his environment. And this was the problem. This is the theme of Mr. Deeds, probably the theme of practically all the other pictures I made after that.
Yes. I was wondering, then, of course, they had added significance because of the immediate post-Depression years and there still being a lot of unemployment and social unrest. But do you think that now, in 1972, Mr. Deeds could still go to town, or Mr. Smith go to Washington?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, I do. The individual, the worth and dignity of the individual has not diminished. It is being bent and broken around, but still, we have individuals today who are making their own mark. We have a man in the United States called Ralph Nader, who is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He himself, just with his own ingenuity, has made corporations like General Motors, politicians, and all kinds of top people quail, and it brought about changes as an individual.
And yet critics of these movies say that they have a certain naivety, which I personally find very appealing, but which they say could never really work in the realm of high business or politics. How do you answer those critics?
I think they're wrong. I think integrity and honesty honesty certainly has its own aura, and an honest man attracts more people than a dishonest man. I think he has more power than I think Pascal's phrase that the heart has reasons that reason itself knows nothing of is still a very, very valid thing. And I think the power of a kind act, the power of honesty, is still has power. And if it doesn't, we're lost.
Can I move on now to Lost Horizon, which I think is still one of your best-loved films? I believe the shooting for that was done in a very unusual location.
Well, I told you my little experience with dry ice, trying to get the breath to show. Now here comes a story about Tibet, the high country of Tibet. Cold, bitter, icy. Now, how do I get the breath to show again? Here, I've got the same problem. I know that the people will not appear cold unless the breath can show. Today we'd probably go right up to Alaska or someplace like that and shoot it, or Tibet, and shoot it. But in those days, location shooting was very expensive, very risky business. We didn't have the equipment we have today. So we had to do it, use our ingenuity. So the thought came to me, how can I shoot it without artificial means, and well, shoot it someplace where it's cold. Where? In an ice house.
A deep freeze?
A deep freeze. So we went out to the industrial section of Los Angeles and looked up some, we call them ice houses, if you call them deep freezes. We found a place there that they had swordfish stacked up like cordwood. And we managed to rent that place, and so we threw out the fish and brought in the actors. I mean, that was about what it and we had we had many problems to solve because we worked in 15 degrees. And another thing I found there, they had a machine that would crush ice and blow it over the fish. And I thought, my goodness, what a wonderful thing. This is my snow, this is my real ice. So
instant blizzard. Instant
blizzard and instant real ice, which crunched as you walked on it. Really not instead of the cornflakes and salt. So we solved a lot of problems. And about 20% of the film was shot in that ice house.
I gather the first 2 reels of that film were cut. How did this come about?
It came about because we ran the film in a small projector room at Columbia Pictures with 3 hours, and we had a small crowd, and we all patted ourselves on the back and said, we have one of the greatest films we've ever made. Yeah, absolutely overwhelmed by it in the projector room. And then we took it out once to have an audience pass judgment on it. Now, this is a necessity, and no picture should ever be released without once or twice showing it to an audience, because there's some surprises in the story for you if you don't. There is a line between the ridiculous and the sublime. And on a one-to-one basis, you will accept from me many, many things. which you will not accept otherwise. The line is very broad. You read a book, you accept an awful lot in that book. Now, on a 1 to 20 basis, the line thins, but on a 1 to 1,000 basis, then the line is very, very thin. And this is what happens in the theater, that the sublime turns into the ridiculous very fast in a crowd. It doesn't when you're just a few people. Well, we took the picture to Santa Barbara, and we showed it there, and they started laughing at it after the first 5 minutes, and they laughed right straight through the film. We had an absolutely non-releasable film, complete failure, and you can imagine what a shock we had, what a traumatic shock this was, that we thought we had one of the greatest films. We couldn't release it. What we thought was the hit of the year in the projection room in Columbia, when we took it out of the theater with a group perhaps of 1,000 people, was evidently the flop of the year. Flop of the century, perhaps. I mean, and really, the effect on Columbia with that picture was disastrous. Half of their budget was $4 million. Half that budget was spent on Lost Horizon. The other half was spent on 20 other films. So if Lost Horizon was a flop, well, Columbia was through. They would go bankrupt. So there was an awful lot of writing on that picture. Well, we went home and we drove home in the rain, and I tell you, the next 2 days I went up into the hills and just walked around, went over every scene. Why? Why did they laugh at this scene? Why? And I couldn't really find an answer to why this beautiful film was not so beautiful in the theater. And so on the third day I came back to the studio and said to Mr. Cohen, only thing I can think of, I'll just put the opening title on the third reel, and now let's preview it again. He says, for heaven's sake, haven't you cut that in? That's all. He says, what if it doesn't work? I don't know whether it'll work or not. That's the only thing I can think about. So, with great trepidation, because now we had all these people from Columbia and New York out to see this film, we took it down to Wilmington. And there it ran with the opening title on the beginning of the third reel. The first 2 reels just simply were up. And we held our breath. And no laughs. No laughs, not only no laughs, but great interest. And suddenly we found that there we had the film that we thought we had, with the first 2 reels out. Well, there was great jubilation. When we came back to the studio, the first thing I did was to go up into the cutting room and take those 2 reels and take them down to the incinerator and threw them right into the incinerator. Up they whooshed into the sky in red fire.